Thank you. That's so kind. Thank you so much, Carmen, for that. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe. I'm with Fixture.io, and I'm here to talk to you about Cypress. So I've got this presentation that I put together, and I wanted to be a little dinosaur themed, but Cypress isn't really dinosaur themed, so I threw in a couple of the little dinosaur icons in the presentation. They're a little subtle, so keep an eye out for them. All right, we're talking about Cypress. Cypress.io is a testing utility. I always think it's good to spend a minute and ask ourselves, why are we doing something, right? In this case, why do we test? Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, duh. It's obvious why we test. Because we're supposed to test, because there's all these reasons why we test. But that is, in reality, not why we test. Even if your job description happens to be write tests. If you work for a QA department and your job description says write tests, that's not really what you're paid to do. What you're paid to do is produce something. That's what we're all trying to get done, is we're trying to produce something. And the better we are at the different tools and techniques and whatever we do, that lets us produce something. So if you want to produce something today, what you really want to do is you want to be awesome. Because the more awesome you are at producing things, the better you are at your job, the more you get paid, and the more you get contract record deals, right? That's how that works. Okay, so today we're going to be awesome. We are going to learn to be awesome by learning about Cypress. Now, there's a ton of benefits to testing. We all know that there's so many freaking benefits to testing. So why don't we test more? If there's all these benefits, why aren't we spending more time testing? And the reason is because testing also, in addition to having benefits, it has costs. What is the cost of testing? It comes down to one word, time. Time is the currency by which we pay for our tests. So, what could we be doing with that time instead of writing tests? We could be writing more features, right? That's, again, what we're trying to do is produce something. We could be producing something, so we have to trade off the benefits of testing with the costs of testing. So, if we can get to a place where testing takes less time and gives us more benefits, then we reach what I call painless testing. Now, you may think painless testing, that's ridiculous. There's no such thing as painless testing, but I challenge you. What if I told you that testing did not have to suck? So let's talk for a minute about testing itself, automated testing. We know that there are the 3 levels of testing. We start off, we've got our end-to-end tests, and we start doing end-to-end tests, and we quickly realize the end-to-end tests are slow, and that they are flaky, and that they are crazy hard to configure, right? I got my testing database set up, I can finally match all my test cases, and I need a new test case that the testing database no longer matches. So now I got multiple test databases. Such a pain. We move on from, but end-to-end testing, we still have to do it. We want to do it. It proves that our application works, right? So we start off and we write some end-to-end tests, and pretty soon we feel like we're doing okay. And then after a while, we realize that our end-to-end tests are getting away from us, and now we've got a huge disaster on our hands because our end-to-end test suite is slow, and it's flaky, and it's hard to set up and test. So we move on from end-to-end testing. Let's talk about the next type of testing and its drawbacks. Unit testing. I love unit testing. I'm a huge fan of unit testing. It's crazy fast. They are easy to write, but they don't necessarily prove anything. We can put 2 pieces that are working separately together and find out that they don't really work the way that we want them to work once they are together. Moving on from unit testing, we finally have integration testing, to which I normally hear the answer of, huh? Yeah, I know that people say that that's a thing, but nobody actually does that thing, right? Of course, there is integration testing in Angular, and if you were in my workshop yesterday, you will have heard me talk about the fact that the configuration for integration testing in Angular really is annoyingly large, but they are at least faster than end-to-end tests. So we've quickly reached what I consider to be the laws of Angular testing. First off, end-to-end tests are flaky and really slow and a pain to set up and run. Second, we have integration tests. They're better, they're faster, but they're pretty verbose and still a little slow. Finally, we get down to unit tests. They're fast and they're great, but they don't really prove that our app is working. And that is where Cypress comes into play. Back to our testing pyramid, Cypress actually solves two problems with the testing pyramid, right? The first one is our end-to-end tests. It can do our end-to-end tests for us, but it can also do integration tests for us, possibly in a way you may not have considered doing. And this comes down to Cypress's architecture and how it works. Cypress is an Electron app. So we see this represented in this big blue container. We run our server because it's an end-to-end application. We run our server separately. Everything's up and running. Then we launch Cypress, and it launches an Electron application, and then the Electron application actually launches the browser. Because Cypress launches the browser, it can control everything about the browser, and it knows everything about the browser, and it's not an in-process system, so it can make file requests and network requests and do all kinds of things that you couldn't do if you were just running something in browser. It does have an in-browser running piece, and that's what is able to look at the DOM and understand the DOM and even manipulate the DOM if necessary. And of course, it has the browser request our application in the test. And whenever our application makes a request, then Cypress sees that request, and it can monitor that request and give us information about the request and the response that's returned from that request, which is part of its usefulness, is that it understands all of our XHR requests. In addition to just monitoring the requests that are made, Cypress can actually intercept requests that are made. So if you have a particular request that it's really hard to get the server configured to return the request and return a certain kind of response, maybe an exception condition or just a very rare condition that is super hard to set up on the server, we can tell Cypress, when this request is made, go ahead and respond with this particular data that I want you to do. And that brings us into one more point. Because Cypress is its own Electron app, it can make network requests. So in end-to-end testing, one of the common scenarios is our application has a large amount of the application that's behind login, right? So for most of our tests, we first have this pre-programmed thing that goes and hits the login page, types in the username, types in the password, hits login, and then once we're actually logged in, we can go to the actual page that we're trying to test. And so that adds all this overhead onto every end-to-end test. Cypress can make its own requests directly to our servers, so we can just mock out the request that logs in a user and have Cypress make that, and now the server understands that this session is logged in. So it can do that and many other things that you can do because it can send its own XHR requests. So that moves us into integration tests, what Cypress can do with integration tests. We can actually take our application server and we can move it outside of being used. Of course, we still have to have it running to serve up our files for our end-to-end tests or for our tests, our integration tests. But we no longer need to worry about hitting our actual application database because every request can be hit and intercepted by the Cypress interceptor. So we can actually test our entire application without ever hitting a live database, which means a couple of things. One, the tests are going to be a lot faster because there's much less network travel. There's no database that's involved in the time that it takes for the database to respond and return. And we can even program against a database system or a server that hasn't yet been finished. So the front-end team can move ahead of the back-end team as they're working separately. Now, this brings us into talking about the features of Cypress. Cypress has a ton of really cool features, and I'm just going to go over a brief highlight of some of the great features, what I consider to be some of the coolest features of Cypress. First off is its UI. I'm going to flip out of here and go over to the Cypress UI. So we start off with the Electron app. That's right here. Let me move that to the right browser. Right monitor, here we go. This is the actual UI. This is the Electron app, and when we tell it to go, it's going to launch a browser, and that is not it. This right here, sorry. This right here is the UI for Cypress. So we can see it over here on the left. We've got our passing tests. We've got 6 passing tests in this sample run. We've got 1 failing test, and we got 1 skipped test. And it tells us very clearly up there. Next to that is the amount of time the test run took. So this test run took 13 seconds. All right? And then there's a few other controls, the most important of which is right over here, and that is to rerun all of our test suite. It also gives us this nice view of the application. We'll come back to that in a minute. So that's the UI of Cypress. Now let's look at the UI of our default end-to-end testing product, which is Protractor. Here is the Protractor UI. Now, I know that you're saying, Joe, this looks just as good as the Cypress UI, right? But if you dig in a little deep, you might find, well, there's a couple of things that aren't quite as effective as the output from this. We do have a kind of a similar situation. I got a couple of passing tests, and I got a failing test over here. And oh, thankfully, I do have a stack trace. That's very useful. I can find out that somewhere down in line 3176 of promise.js is where the error bubbled up because it was the end-to-end test runner. That has nothing to do with my code. So my failing test, I'm getting nothing out of this. And I've got this whole section here at the bottom. Let's zoom in again. That gives me essentially 0 information other than the fact that something is wrong. So that is the Cypress UI. It's also got a really nice syntax. Let's do a little bit of coding. All right. I want to write myself a little test here that's just very basic, a basic smoke test, right? I want to visit my main page and just check that a typical piece of text is there. So Cypress operates out of a little CY object. That's the global object that kind of launches everything off. And so if I want to hit a particular URL, I use the visit command. And I give it the path that I want to hit. In my case, in this particular application, the default path is /tags equals, there's where I want to go. Now that I've hit that page, I can tell Cypress, look for a piece of text, CUI dot, and I just want it somewhere in there, so I'm going to use the contains operator. I'm going to say, hey, this page should contain Angular, and then inside parentheses 2 plus. So there's my test. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my Cypress UI, and that's this second spec right here. I'm going to click on that. It's going to run it in Cypress. This is going to execute, and when it's all done, it's going to tell me my test was passing. Very simple, very easy syntax. The next thing I really like about Cypress is the set of bundled tools that it comes included with. So this is just a sum of the tools that come bundled inside of Cypress that you can utilize inside of your tests. First off is Sign-on.js. Sign-on.js is like the gold standard for mocking libraries. Right? It's got way more features than any other mocking library that's out there. It's included, and it's actually built into some of the Cypress operations. Then we have Underscore. Underscore is an amazing library. It's utilized way too little. So if I wanted to, I can just go over to a test, and let's say that I had a couple of arrays that I needed to union, right? Well, Underscore is just built right in, so I can union or do any other operation that's available inside of Underscore. It comes with jQuery, which, you know, yes, jQuery is becoming older and we're moving away from it, but one, a lot of developers know it, and two, inside of end-to-end tests, we still oftentimes need to dig into the UI, and even though Cypress itself includes a whole bunch of functionality to access the UI, sometimes we want to do something else and we want jQuery, and so it's already bundled in there if we need it. Again, there's no extra payload because this isn't our production product. This is just our unit testing or our end-to-end testing environment. Moment.js for dealing with dates, Minimatch for dealing with pattern matching, blobs for dealing with files, file paths, and then it comes with the promises library. Of course, we have promises built into JavaScript as well. So, tons of great bundled tools. Another great feature of Cypress, which I did talk about already, is the fact that it can intercept XHR requests. So let's just go back to our running test, and we can see a couple of really cool things going on here. So let's say that I want to look at this particular request. I want some information. I can just select it and open up the console, and now I've got this amazing, let me just zoom in my console just a little bit. I've got this amazing view. I can see what the method was. I can see what the URL was for this specific request, the status code. Do I need to double check that the request was formed the way I thought it was? I can go here. If I need to see exactly what the server sent back, when we're testing, end-to-end testing, we're oftentimes just care about is the front end working with the back end, and that really comes down a lot to when requests are made and how requests are made and what comes back. So this is a common tool, is just looking at what actually happened when it comes to the XHR requests and making sure they happen the way that we want. In addition to intercepting and just watching and giving us diagnostic information about XHR requests, Cypress also lets us, as I said, mock those requests. So let's go over here, and I want to uncomment these 2 lines of code. We're going to write another test here. So I want to do a little test about searching. We're checking out that our search filter should match when we're filtering it. Let's just explain this using the UI. So in this application, close that down. If I come to the basic regular part of the application, and of course this is test data, so I've got a few articles showing up, and if I want to filter on those, I can just type into here, and then it filters down to a certain set. Now, normally, again, if you set up your test database, then you have a bunch of test scenarios, but what if we have a test scenario that is difficult to set up in the database or isn't already set up in the database? In this case, let's say that we want to test the scenario when the server sends back just one article from a search request. And I want to make sure that the UI is laid out, right? So the correct response would be one of these little article nodes is showing up. So first off, is I want Cypress to intercept that request. I tell it, I need you to start intercepting some requests, so I'm going to run the Cypress server. And it's still only going to intercept the requests that I want. And now I can tell it which request I want it to intercept, so we use the route command for that. I say intercept request to the following route, and this is a configuration object that has 3 pieces. The first one is the method, and in our case it's a post. Then the URL, and the URL happens to be /API/articles/search. And finally is the response. And so I can tell it exactly what data I want it to respond with. Now I happen to have a sample article. And again, this is a real application. I'm not using some demo application like to do MVC. This is a real application, so this is some actual data. Here is a sample single article, and I called this search article, so I'll just grab that name, come down here, post it into my response, and that's what I want you to respond with, and now we can write the main part of the test where we do what we need to do. So, very simple to go over to our application, and using the inspector tool, I'll just figure out that this particular line, oh, that's really small, let's make that bigger. All right, it's an input that has a class of search in addition to the validation classes, so that's what we're going to use. And we want to do cy.get input.search using just your standard CSS selectors. And then I want to type some value into there to search on. In this case, because I'm controlling the server, it doesn't really matter what I type in. So let's just type in, we can use the type operator, and I'm going to type in bupkis, one of my favorite words. All right, then we need to click the button. So again, I'll use the inspector to look at this button, and I find out that it's a div with a class of search button. So cy.get .search -button. And now that I have it, it's easy to click it by just calling the click method. And now that we've clicked the button, it's going to make that request. It's going to send back, and the UI is going to adjust. So we want to count how many of those article nodes show up. So again, I'm going to use my inspector to figure out what kind of element this is, and this is an app-article element. So Back over to our code, cy.get, app-article. And I don't have to differentiate whether or not this is a collection that I'm getting or a single item. The method is still the same, get, but in this case, it's just we're going to get a collection of items. And now I can do an assertion, and this is a very fluent interface, so I'm just going to chain that right off of my get. I want to make sure that you have, so I'm going to say should, and then it's got this very interesting text-based syntax. So have.length of 1. So it should be in the list of app articles only 1. And let's save that and go back to our running tests. And it's already ran. It already picked up the changes. It does watch the tests and rerun whenever I adjust test files. And so it's already run. This second test is passing as well. So that is XHR interception. The next thing it does is it actually has this cool fixture data feature. So notice in my test, I have all of this. Get my mouse over here. I've got this whole piece of sample data inside of the test, and I really don't like that. It's way too much garbage inside the middle of the test. I'd rather have that somewhere else, and I want to potentially reuse this data in multiple tests. So I'm going to delete this, and notice over here on the left, you can see Cypress actually creates a subdirectory, and inside of that subdirectory has a lot of subdirectories within it, and one of them is fixtures. So for example, I've created this right here, article 1, article 2, JSON files, and this one happens to, again, have just a single article inside of it. So I can actually switch out this search article. Instead of giving it an actual piece of data, I give it a string and with a little special format of fixture, article 1. That's all I need to do. And now I'm reusing a set of data. I'll save that change back over to the test runner. It's already run again. Took a whopping 1.7 seconds. And let's rerun the test. And again, now I'm using fixture data. So that's another really cool feature of Cypress. The next one is a superior developer experience. So this is going to be really fun. We're going to go and try to do a little bit of diagnosis of our failing test. We'll start with Protractor, right? I got a failing test, and it's in this particular test. And so let's say that we go over to our application, and I know that it's somewhere in home search. So I'm going to check out my home search component. And I'm not 100% sure what's causing the failure, but I'm thinking, maybe I'm not supposed to pass in an empty string. Maybe I'm supposed to pass in nothing or null. So I'll try that. We'll make that change, go back over to Protractor. I think this is going to fix my problem. Rerun my Protractor tests. Oh, it's done. Hey. Okay. And we're still getting an error. Okay, that wasn't it. Back to my code. And, okay, it wasn't that. Oh, I think I needed to pass in an object here. That's what it was, to reset the form properly. I think it was tag settings. I spell this right, INGS, and that's supposed to be empty. Right, okay. Save that, back to Protractor. Let's rerun that and see if that fixes it. Is there anybody know any good jokes? While we wait and wait, oh, it's done. Okay, and that still didn't fix it. Dang it, what was it? All right, back over and we look around a little bit more, and we'll undo this change. Let's head over into our HTML file, and oh, wait, the button. I forgot to handle the click event. Maybe I was building this and didn't put it in, or maybe through some refactoring, somehow that got missed. We didn't put our click event in. So we put the click event in, and now our test would be finally passing. So that's the experience in working with Protractor, using it to diagnose and debug tests, right? So I'm going to leave that gone for now. And we'll put that back, and let's see what it's like dealing with Cypress. Now, Cypress has the same test over here in this spec. So I'm going to go over to this spec, and while this is going, well, this is taking a while. I don't want to wait for that. So even though it's going pretty fast, I still don't want to wait for that. So I'm going to go over into my home page, not the home page spec. That's where that's at. And it's this test that's failing. So I'm just going to tell it, I want you to only run that test and save that. And now back over to Cypress. Okay, it ran, and it's waiting to see if, now it's failed. Okay, so that's not it. Let's go back to our code. And we're going through the same scenario, right? We go over here, and we think, it's not supposed to be an empty string. It's supposed to be nothing. Back over to Cypress, and it's already failed again. I don't know. I actually need to rerun the tests. There we go. I have to manually tell it to go, like I did with a Protractor. And it's trying, oh, that wasn't it, okay. Now, undo that change over here, and try my tag settings of nothing. Back over here, tell it to rerun the tests. And is that what I got? And nope, that's not it. But if I undo that and head over to the HTML page and add that click event back in and save it, go back to Cypress. Pretty sure that was the problem. Run it. Hey, there it goes. It's working. That's the difference in developer experience between something like Protractor and Cypress. See how quickly I can zero in on the test that I'm dealing with, and as I make changes to my code and try it, I get quick responses, a couple of seconds to run a single test. And again, this is a real application, right? This application is 6.5 megs in dev. Delivered to production, it's about 700K. By far not the hugest application in the world, but still a real application, and that has a real loading time to it. All right, the next feature of Cypress that I really like is debugging with time traveling and snapshots. I'm literally leaving one of the best things for last. So going back to our scenario, I'm going to again cut that out and go back to Cypress and rerun that test. And this time, after the test is run, let's assume that this whole entire test suite is run and I got this failing test and I want to figure out why the test is failing. So I go here and I start hovering over different things. This is when it first visits the page. This is when the request is made. And notice how it's flipping back and forth between two views. Down at the bottom, you can see it goes between request and response. This is basically before and after that request is made. That's what the UI looked like. So and it looks like the same for all of these requests until finally it gets to here. And now, here's the point where I hit my input and try to find my input. And actually, you can see it highlights over on the right-hand side. It's actually highlighting that text box and telling me that's the text box you grabbed. So if I have any problems writing my test and I'm grabbing the wrong thing, I can come in here and look at the test run and it'll tell me which element I actually grabbed. And if I want to, I can even click on a specific point and I get a pinned snapshot and I can undo the highlights if I need to and unpin that. So next is when I typed in NGRX. Notice it shows me a little dot that's like a hit location. That's where I typed in NGRX. Again, I click on that, and I can see before and after. Let's turn off that highlight. And after, then there I have indeed successfully typed in that text. And so we're going along. I do a search. We click this reset button, and now the problem is that, I can see right off the bat, I didn't make another XHR request. That's my problem. I didn't make an XHR request. Why aren't I making an XHR request? I go into my code and start thinking, well, I clicked the button, and I can see right here that the button was clicked, and I can see this little hit location says it clicked the button. So I start with the button, that's the problem, and notice I don't have a click event handler, and I save that, and now I've got passing tests. The final feature of Cypress that I want to highlight is the fact that it could take screenshots and video. And that's very simple. I can go into any Cypress test, and I can just do, not there, cy.screenshot. And that's going to take a screenshot, and it's going to put it right over here in my screenshots folder. And now I can store screenshots. So that's kind of a short, brief overview of the features of Cypress. So I think it's worth talking about pricing. All right, now brace yourselves, everybody sit down for the big reveal. Cypress is free. Everything that I've showed you is absolutely free. If you want Cypress, they have a software as a service solution where they'll store your screenshots for you and videos of contrasting runs so you can compare them easily. You can do that for a fee, and for most companies, I think it's about $100 a month. It is useful to talk about what Cypress isn't great at. It doesn't do OAuth very well, but it's pretty easy to work around it, or if you want to really dig into it, you can kind of figure out how to fake out OAuth, but it doesn't really do it great. I was able to work around it with about half an hour's worth of work. So, in summary, Cypress is awesome. I love Cypress. I was really not a big fan of end-to-end testing until I started checking out Cypress. And as you can see, it has a ton of really cool features. You should definitely check it out and learn testing, what I call testing kung fu. Thanks very much.